Okay, so we're following on. Okay, so the moral issues of this war between Hamas and Palestine. And I can actually talk about this because, from my understanding, from my perspective, again, listen to everything I say, analyze it for yourself, and then come up to your own conclusions. But for me, anti-Semitism is a massive problem in humanity. I've taken that away. I've gone to think about it, and I've actually looked at the facts and gone, "Wow, didn't realize how bad this was historically an issue." So we're gonna have to deal with that. No one knows, and there's no information. It's really difficult to find out, and this hopefully will shock you, and will shock you out of paralysis, particularly as Christians, because there's a whole biblical perspective here on how we treat Jewish people, and therefore what we think about the Jewish state and the state of Israel in all sorts of different ways, religiously, politically, socially, and how we then basically do some sort of equivalence in our thinking when we have issues like this where there's a terrorist attack on Israel and then they respond in this way and then work out who's right and wrong. And it's actually fundamentally very simple. And it's very simple for the reason, and this is what I'm going to argue, is like everything you're being told is not just a lie, it's the worst kind of lies. It's like there's virtually no truth in any of it, of any of the propaganda we're being told, because it's anti-Semitism. What is anti-Semitism? It's hatred of Jews. Just because you want to hate Jews. So I'm going to try and get you to watch other stuff. So I'm going to put 2 links below. One's from a rabbi who kind of gave a preach, I guess you'd say, but he was talking about being neurodivergent. And the point he was making was that he's arguing in his preach, which is based on the character of Abraham. It's like the origin and the basis of being Jewish is being completely different to everything else on the earth. That's why they call the nations Goyim, which means nations, which we transliterate as Gentiles, and call themselves something different. So in the Jewish mindset, there is the nations and there's them. And their understanding, which is correct biblically, is like they're called out to be completely different from all other nations, and that's the story. So he goes through that. There's lots of really interesting points. I find I don't know if you're the same, but you'll find, if you're not, that this is true. Like people who are smart and intellectual and think things through carefully do come up with a lot of interesting insights. So don't be put off just because it's a rabbi and you're a Christian or whatever. Like, a lot of rabbis have some very wonky theological points, and then actually a lot of them who have the same wonky theological points have a lot of really good theological points on some stuff. So it's not like this is right or wrong. This guy is black and white, right or wrong. Obviously, the difference between us and what he's saying is we're Christians, we believe Jesus is the Messiah, and he doesn't. His religion, if you call what we have as a religion, is fundamentally very, very different and based on different things, so it's not the same equivalence anyway. But he has a lot of good points, and then we can take his points to say, actually, if we believe Jesus is the Messiah, we should be like that anyway, and we should be a bit like the Jews, or his claim to be Jews, because that belief system is for us. So a lot of interesting points. And there's a cool dude who I listen to quite a lot called Nehemiah Gordon, who the YouTube video is called The Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz. And he gives a very Jewish perspective, but particularly I'll say something he says is like free speech. Like, so like he gives, so watch the whole video. Don't just go, okay, that's the nugget from the video, because actually I haven't finished watching it, so I don't know what nugget. But one of the things he said that I wanted to talk about was free speech, which is basically dead in the water as a Western concept because of the whole messaging. And he was saying, I think he was saying his father or grandfather, one of the two, I think it was his father. They were talking about some literal marches in the streets of Chicago when he was younger, with some Nazis. And the point we've got to is we've got very confused about different types of speech, so free speech, hate speech. So the whole thing is like, particularly in America, like it's a amendment right to have free speech, so you can basically say what you want. And the whole point isn't to protect us from people that say bad things, it's to actually promote the people that say bad things. This isn't Nehemiah Gordon's point, but would be my point. So I'm not sure if you would relate to this further on in the video. It's like, by having free speech and letting anyone say what they want, you delegitimize bad speech by having free speech. So the people who look like idiots sound like idiots because what they're saying is idiotic. So allowing bad people to not say bad things actually is not good for democracy, because then people are attracted to them because they don't get to hear that, and they're actually, the point is, hey look, I'm being censored by whatever, something higher than you, by, let's say, discredit the elites. The elite, the people that control the messaging, are basically trying to cancel me, to use a word, and trying to censor me. Why are they doing that? There's always a point to be made, which is why we should be careful of doing that in the first place. But everything has a message. Lots of things are censored, so we can't say them. So there is no free speech. And basically, and this is the point I've heard so far in what Nehemiah Gordon's saying, is like, simply, okay, that's bad what they're saying, but when they're in control in 20 years, like the Nazis, if they were in control, then if we stop them from saying what they want, then they have a right to stop us from saying what they want. And that's the value of free speech. And what is right or wrong will always be outed in the end, as we said in the end of the first. So kind of watch them. And they give some Jewish perspectives, and you get some Jewish perspective on stuff. The rabbi is thoroughly interesting. Nehemiah Gordon's quite touching because he tells a story of his own experiences and his own relatives in terms of what's being accused of the Jews at the moment, which is genocide. I mean, as we said, like, it's on the news everywhere. Loads of people getting interviewed. When have you ever heard a news person recall that the Jewish people understand genocide because of what happened in World War II, because of the Holocaust, that there is no fundamental understanding, although we do understand. It's like, well, who we're accusing of being genocidal actually understands genocide better than anyone. So the rights or wrongs of that are irrelevant. The issue at hand is like, they understand what we'd be accusing them of. What does that say? Because that's an important fact. That fact's never recalled by anyone on either side. And I'm going to explain to you why that is completely irrelevant anyway, and it's going to shock you. So if you don't want to be shocked, you might not want to listen to the rest of this. So this is my opinion, because I've gone away and researched it. I found my opinion to be right, and then when my opinion's been tweaked or informed, it's gone more in favour of the Jewish people, and Obviously, there is a Christian worldview perspective of that, which we should all have, by the way. If we're just blankly criticising the Jews, we're criticising our own scripture. Because there's so many things the Bible says about Jewishness, about the Jewish people as a nation, about Israel, and how we interact with them. Some very specific things, like simply the Bible says, if you want to be cursed, curse Israel, and God will curse you back. If you want a blessing, bless Israel, and God will bless you back. That's very black and white. That's about as black and white as you can get, particularly on this issue from scripture. And there are other things and bigger things. Anyway, I'm going to basically explain to you my journey of discovery. Very fundamentally, it's not going to explain the whole thing. So again, my intention is to look deeper into this. So far, we're just trying to get an overview of what's actually going on and get some idea of actually the truth of the matter. So we can begin to have a valid opinion, not just a misformed opinion. And then by validating our opinion, it's less misformed. It gets more wholly formed. And again, we're not looking to switch from black and white to being misinformed to totally informed, because we're human. We're looking to be better informed. So you have what we're dealing with at the moment in the context of what's going on in this season with this war is the main accusations of Jewish people. So genocide, occupation, even human rights, which in the context of the other accusations makes the whole accusation of human rights irrelevant. That sounds bad, but actually doesn't really matter. It's not if it's bad, it's like, is it true or not? I think, yeah, we're not dismissing anyone's human rights. It's a completely different issue than what's been presented to us. So what does that mean? We're misinformed. So genocide, expulsion from land, occupation of land, and then rights, really. Off the top of my head, that seems to be... So let me explain the history of the Jewish people to you, very simply, okay? As much as I can remember. And you've got to remember, while I'm telling this story, and it's true, because it's historical, it's not the whole facts. So there's much more than I'm going to tell you. So you've got Jesus, you've got the Romans coming and destroying the temple in AD 70. Then you've got a whole, I think it's called the Bar Kokhba Revolution. And it's basically a revolution against Roman rule. So AD 130, and again, you might not want to look into certain things I'm talking about because I'm not going to explain the whole history. So you might want to look into that. The Bar Kokhba Revolution. You've got to understand, from a political point of view, everything is about revolution. That's the truth. So if it is true, the whole point is political revolution. This is the story of political revolution. It didn't turn out well for the Jews, I think, off the top of my head. The Romans killed over 1 million Jews. That's genocide. They told... It's been used, genocide. There are less than 10,000 people who identify as Palestinian who are being killed. Is that in any way slightly less than just completely horrific? No, it's not on an individual basis. But we're not talking about an individual basis. We're not looking at a news item and going, this is totally horrendous. Because the accusation against Israel is one of genocide. So the accusation is they've killed slightly less than 10,000 people. So you compare factually 10,000 people against 1 million people, then which would you say is more genocidal? It would be obvious because facts are facts, Again, we're being given a message, we're being communicated lies. It's meant to confuse us, so we have a sense of paralysis, and more than paralysis, we end up actually doing the wrong thing because we have the wrong insight, which is a lie. So anyway, if you're like, I want you to explain that more, Tim. I want you to properly explain that. I cannot understand what you're getting at. I'm not saying that's unimportant. So that's not my point. That's the beginning of my point, and it isn't even the point. So if you want to forget that, forget that. My point is, they're expelled from the land in AD 130. At this point, and this is what happens. If you want to forget what happens, fine. Actually, it's not at all in my thinking at all. So this is the point I'm making. So the Jews kind of have nowhere to live. They're homeless. They kind of wander. They actually get put in different. They end up in different physical locations. Actually, there's a far more interesting point of view, which doesn't relate to this, but this kind of changes everything if I tell you this. So I'm going to tell you it, but it isn't part of my perspective. So if you understand the Bible, Chronicles and Kings, the nation of Israel is split into two. What we understand thoroughly, or more thoroughly, is like the Babylonians came and sacked Jerusalem and expelled the Jews. Jews is a transliteration of tribe of Judah. So we call the Jewish people Jews, but actually it's 2 of the 12 tribes of Israel. So the other 10 actually got expelled a bit before that by the Assyrian Empire. Now, where they were expelled to, we don't know. They are called, within this whole story, the 10 lost tribes of Israel. No one knows where they went. No one knows where they are. What does that mean? Some of these people are being found, by the way, and there's fascinating stories. That's not the point. The point is we don't know. So I would presume, because it's an entire nation, that they went to lots of different places. We know some of the places they've been to, and they kind of confirm that story. So actually, you could be a complete anti-Semite, and your family tree could go back to one of these expelled Israelites, effectively, and you wouldn't even know it. So the whole world's mixed with not so much what we call Jewish blood, but Israelite blood from the 10 tribes of Israel, and we've got no idea. Okay, so there's a sense of Jewishness in the entire world, or sense of being an Israelite in the entire world, which is just lost. It's gone. I would tend to think that, certainly from my perspective, if the whole world becomes anti-Israel and just like whatever that means, then there's going to be a whole lot of anti-Israelites who are basically Israelites. So that's kind of ironic to me, but that's not my story. So my story begins about the time of Crusade. So it's about 1,000 years, bit plus later. So you had these Jews expelled from the land. So again, we're talking about a genocidal nation expelling people from the land, and not only had they been expelled from that land, they had genocide committed against them. So it begins in a place called Worms, which I think is around Germany or something. Now some of my details are a bit hazy, but like you can go and find out for yourself. And like me to tell the story would just take so long. I am going to actually go through the whole story, and it's fundamentally a long story, and it's not easy to do. I'm just simply wanting to easily retell it at this point to get our point of view more equated with the facts. So this is a story. You've got how do I say this? I think the best way in my mind telling it live would be a whole bunch of mostly scallywags, if not entirely scallywags, sign up to the Crusades, the church. And their thinking is, before we go into what we'd call at the moment physically the land of Israel, and we kill a whole bunch of people, actually, some of those people are Jews, okay? there are Jewish people where we are. So why do we have to go to a foreign land and their land to basically kill them when we can just kill them here? So they do. So again, what are our themes here? What are we looking at? Genocide, expulsion, occupation. So the Jews aren't occupying Germany, they're just in Germany. That's the same for the whole storyline. They are then expelled from Germany. They're literally expelled. So that's the first event of expulsion. They are terrorized, brutalized, murdered, and I imagine within that, quite naturally, a lot of their possessions are stolen. And this is repeated, okay? So there are the three factors in each of the stories I'm going to tell you of the whole story is like expulsion from the land. Well, there's four really. Expulsion from the land, violence that more often than not leads to death, not just expulsion, and stealing of their property. Now, in every location I'm going to retell this story, that happens to different factors. So to get into that will be quite complex and make this much more difficult. So at the moment, I'm just saying they're expelled from the land, but I'm not dealing with the death, the violence, and the theft of prophecy. I'm just dealing with the expulsion, because that's the issue at hand. The Jews expelling the Palestinians from the land. Okay, because we have to understand the historical perspective. That would be the point. So when I say expulsion, don't just think it's just expulsion. So actually, the point would be, when I explain happened to the Jews, not just it happened to them more than what the Jews have been accused of doing to the Palestinians happened to them. So pretty much every story just presume, more often than not, it's going to be a genocide. So we have expulsion from the land of Germany. So the Jews are then kicked out of the land. They settle in... I mean, obviously, they would have gone to different places. I think there were some, again, I'm using the language thing. What I know is most of them went through Spain. Actually, that's the ironic thing is, why did they go to Spain? Because it was ruled by Muslims. Why have they done that? Because they were getting persecuted by Christians, and they had more in common back then with the Muslims, so they thought they'd be safer. So they either entirely end up in Spain by a few, and there's probably a little bit actually, the truth of the matter is, probably some go to France. Whatever happens, same thing. They get expelled from the land, genocide, really horrific story. I mean, if we were to make it up, could we make it any worse? Don't think so. So, part of the core bit of the Spanish Inquisition was to get rid of the Jews. And it's a whole horrific story. So I read this and found out the actual definition of waterboarding someone, which is a violent way to interrogate someone. The actual definition, which I thought I understood, because I read the story and someone said this is what happened to Jews. I'm like, they're basically describing waterboarding, and I can understand they're describing waterboarding, and it's far more dramatic than I thought I understood. Now, when we retell these stories and we want truth, we should get the truth. So this is what the dramatic and violent part of waterboarding is. So something's put over your face or in your mouth. In this case, it was in the mouth. And then water is poured on that. The idea of the water is, and the gag, is like you start gagging and then the water gets in your lungs. So your body starts to react in a certain way as a natural defense against what it thinks has been done to. The effect of the gag is it actually gets drawn into the throat. And at that point, when the gagging becomes starts to transition from a violent act against a human being to an act of basically murdering them or killing them, it's like it stopped, and the actual bit of waterboarding, which is waterboarding, is the gag is either, because it's down the throat as well, it's ripped out, and that's where the pain comes from. So it's like, well, waterboarding is waterboarding, but like the my point would be like, wow, and then the wow of that is like, well, the Spanish church invented this to persecute Jews, and from the story, highly effective. So the whole Spanish thing is a very fascinating story, and actually, if you want to dive down, I would dive down on this. So the idea was forced conversion or expulsion. So it's a long story, it's a violent story, it's an oppressive story of Jewish people being in a certain lands, modern day Spain, which ends in either conversion or expulsion for every single Jew. So for the second time in history, after being expelled from their own land, they're expelled from another land. So they go to different places. So you have, actually, I think it's 4 places. So a small minority of the Jews in Spain went back to Jerusalem. A small went to North Africa, to kind of what we call Tunisia, Morocco area, because in their minds we're much safer with Muslims than we are with the Christians, because the Christians are basically killing us and persecuting us, and we're being expelled. Now, the majority of Jews went to France, and then so you've got 3 places, and the last destination is Italy. Now, interestingly, the term ghetto comes from Italy, because that's the nickname given to the Jewish quarters, basically. So the funny thing is, you find these all over Europe. So what are Jewish quarters? They're parts of major cities in Europe where the Jews emigrated towards to avoid persecution. And they're basically told, you can live in this city, we're not happy you live in the city, you have to live in your own quarter, and you're not allowed to live outside that quarter. So that's what a Jewish quarter is, and that's where the term ghetto comes from. And it was first given to the ghetto in Venice. So we have ideas of ghetto. Ghetto is a term around what we're talking about, which in particular is not just what we think ghetto is, but is orientated and determined and means entirely around Jewish people, doesn't mean whatever other people. That's originally its origins. Anyway, so France, guess what happens? They get kicked out. Where do the French Jews go to? They go to England. Guess what happens? They get kicked out. They go back to France. Guess what happens? They get kicked out. They go to England. Guess what happens? They get kicked out. They go to France. Guess what happens? They get kicked out. They go to Germany. Guess what happens? They get kicked out. They move east. So now we've got quite a wide dispersion of Jews, because obviously not all Jews, when they're kicked out of a land, go to the same place. So when I say kicked out, they were kicked out, they were expelled from the land. There was killing, there was murder, there was violence. Most of their positions were taken. So it's not like all the Jews now are in Germany or Italy. At some point they're expelled from Italy, they get kicked out, they go east. And they end up in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine and in the Russia, basically modern southwestern Russia, which is bordering with what would be Ukraine and what would be Lithuania, and in Lithuania what would be bordering with Belarus. So they're all in those areas, east Germany. Eventually the Germans that settle get kicked out. Guess what happens? They get kicked out. they moved back to Germany or they moved back to the Middle East. Guess what happened in Germany? The Holocaust. Now, this is the correction I want you to have in your thinking. Like, all the poor Jews that had to suffer the Holocaust. No, that is not the historical story. The historical story is just the European story. Everywhere they go, they get kicked out of eventually. Only takes 50 years, 100 years. Most places have been kicked out, they've gone back to, and then they've been kicked out again. I mean, it's to me, I know probably 5% of the whole story. It's staggering, and it's just the European side. So what you actually get the idea of, like, and it's like the Jews' history is they realise they're not safe anywhere. There's nowhere. Every time they go to a land, they get kicked out. Anyway, they go to Germany, and the Holocaust happens, and that's the whole storyline. So I think we've got to be. The reality for me is, if we're accusing the nation of Israel at the moment and Jews of doing certain things, and they've had an entire history of what they're being accused of being done to them, then we got to watch what we're saying about them, because they have a certain perspective that no one else in the history of humankind has. If that's true, which it is, if we accuse them of being certain things and doing certain things, and we don't have that understanding, then we're not going to get this right. We're not going to get this right.